Everyone bullied the 100-year-old woman. Then, the truth left them speechless. They laughed at her wrinkled hands as she counted coins at the grocery store. They mocked her slow steps on the sidewalk. They whispered cruel jokes when she struggled to reach items on high shelves. But what nobody knew was that this frail 100-year-old woman, hiding behind those tired eyes, held a secret so powerful it would shatter everything they thought they knew about her. And when the truth finally came out, the entire town would fall to their knees in shame. Because sometimes the people we judge the most harshly are the ones who've sacrificed everything we could never imagine. And this is her story. Margaret Hayes lived alone in a tiny wooden house at the end of Maple Street. The paint was peeling, the fence was broken, and neighbors complained that her property brought down the value of their pristine suburban paradise. Every morning she'd shuffle to the corner store with her worn canvas bag, taking nearly 20 minutes to walk what others covered in 3. Young mothers would pull their children away as if age itself was contagious. Teenagers filmed her for cruel TikTok videos that went viral with laughing emojis. The local coffee shop owner rolled his eyes when she took forever counting exact change. Even the mailman sighed loudly when delivering her letters as if she'd personally inconvenienced him by existing. But Margaret never complained. She simply smiled that gentle smile that reached her cloudy blue eyes and continued her quiet routine. What they didn't see were the nights she sat alone looking at old photographs, running her fingers across faces frozen in time, or the way she'd whisper names into the darkness as if keeping promises to ghosts. One particularly cold Tuesday, everything escalated. When Marcus Chen, a real estate developer, started a neighborhood petition to force Margaret into a nursing home, he claimed she was a safety hazard, that her house was an eyesore, that someone her age couldn't possibly care for themselves properly. Within days, 73 signatures covered the pages. People who'd never even spoken to her agreed. She needed to go. The local news picked up the story, framing it as concerned citizens trying to help an elderly woman, but their smiling faces on camera couldn't hide the truth. They just wanted her gone. They wanted her property for development. They wanted to erase this reminder that they too would someday be old and unwanted. Margaret received the official notice on a Friday afternoon. She had 30 days to vacate or face legal action for the first time in years. Tears rolled down her weathered cheeks, not because she feared leaving, but because she'd made a promise long ago, a promise she'd kept for 76 years, a promise that tied her to this house and this town in ways nobody understood. But then everything changed when Sarah Mitchell, a young journalist new to town, decided to investigate. Something felt wrong about the unanimous hatred toward one harmless elderly woman. Sarah started digging through old town records, and what she found in the dusty archives of the public library made her hands shake. There, in yellowed newspapers from 1949, was a photo of a beautiful young woman in a nurse's uniform. The caption read, "Local hero saves 17 children from orphanage fire." The woman was Margaret Hayes, but that was just the beginning. Sarah discovered that Margaret had been a battlefield nurse in World War II, serving in some of the war's most brutal campaigns. She'd earned 3 medals for valor after running into enemy fire multiple times to rescue wounded soldiers. But Margaret had never spoken about it. Never wore her medals, never attended veteran ceremonies. Sarah needed to know why. So she knocked on Margaret's door one evening, and what the old woman told her would expose a truth so devastating it would haunt Sarah forever. Margaret invited her in, and the small house that neighbors mocked as shabby was actually filled with carefully preserved memories. Photographs of children lined every wall, hundreds of them, smiling faces from different eras. Margaret sat down slowly and began to speak, her voice stronger than Sarah expected. She explained that after the war, she couldn't have children of her own due to injuries sustained in a bombing. So she dedicated her entire life to fostering children that nobody else wanted. The sick ones, the traumatized ones, the ones with disabilities that other families rejected over 56 years. Margaret had fostered 147 children. She'd used every penny of her military pension and worked 3 jobs to feed them, clothe them, and send them to school. This house that looked shabby was shabby because she'd chosen children over renovations every single time. She'd given everything, kept nothing. But here's where the story takes its most shocking turn. Sarah started contacting the children, now adults scattered across the country. And what they told her shattered every assumption. There was Dr. James Peterson, one of the country's leading heart surgeons, who'd been a sickly foster child. Margaret nursed back to health. There was State Senator Linda Vasquez, who Margaret had rescued from an abusive home and put through college. There was Marcus Thompson, a decorated Marine, who credited Margaret with saving his life when he was a suicidal teenager. One by one, Sarah discovered that Margaret's foster children had become teachers, doctors, engineers, artists, parents, contributors to society. Lives that might have been lost or broken beyond repair if not for one woman's unconditional love. And here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Marcus Chen, the real estate developer leading the charge to evict Margaret. His assistant was named Jennifer Chen. She was Marcus's adopted daughter, and when Sarah showed Jennifer the photos, Jennifer's face went pale. She recognized her own face in one of those pictures on Margaret's wall. Jennifer had been one of Margaret's foster children 30 years ago. She'd lived with Margaret for 2 years before being adopted. Margaret had loved her, protected her, prepared her for a better life, and now Jennifer's adoptive father was trying to destroy the woman who'd saved her. Sarah published her article on a Wednesday morning, and it exploded across social media within hours. The story had millions of views, news networks picked it up, celebrities shared it, but more importantly, Margaret's foster children started arriving in town. They came from California, from Texas, from New York, from overseas. They came with their own children and grandchildren. They came with photos and letters and memories. By Friday afternoon, over 200 people had gathered on Maple Street. They formed a human chain around Margaret's house. Doctors and lawyers among them immediately offered pro bono services to fight the eviction. A GoFundMe campaign raised $800,000 in 48 hours to renovate her home and ensure her care. But the most powerful moment came when Jennifer Chen stood on Margaret's porch, tears streaming down her face, and apologized in front of everyone. She'd forgotten she'd been so young. But now she remembered the kindness, the bedtime stories, the way Margaret had held her during nightmares. Marcus Chen stood in his driveway watching, and the weight of what he'd tried to do crushed him. He withdrew the petition that same day and donated $50,000 to a foundation being established in Margaret's name. The town council held an emergency meeting, and instead of evicting Margaret, they declared her a town hero. They renamed the street Margaret Hayes Boulevard. They commissioned a statue for the town square. But Margaret didn't want any of it. All she wanted was to know that her children remembered her. And they did. They so deeply did. Every one of them came to hug her, to thank her, to introduce their families, to tell her they'd become good people because she'd shown them what goodness looked like. The woman they'd all ignored, the woman they'd mocked and dismissed and tried to erase, had quietly shaped the world around them in more ways than they'd ever know. She'd created doctors who saved lives, teachers who inspired students, parents who loved their children. Ripples of kindness spreading out from one humble woman who'd asked for nothing in return. Margaret lived 3 more years after that day, surrounded by love, visited constantly by her children and grandchildren, who she'd fostered when she passed peacefully in her sleep. At 103, over 500 people attended her funeral. They came from 6 different countries, and every single one had a story about how Margaret Hayes had changed their life. The house that neighbors wanted demolished became a museum and foster care training center, teaching a new generation that the most powerful thing you can do in this world is love someone when they're unlovable, help someone when they're helpless, see someone when they're invisible. Margaret never wanted fame. She never wanted recognition. She just wanted to keep a promise she'd made to herself after witnessing so much death in the war. She'd promised to create life, to nurture it, to give broken children the chance she never had. And she did, one child at a time for over 5 decades, while the world walked past her without seeing. This story reminds us that we never truly know the battles people have fought, the sacrifices they've made, the quiet heroism hidden behind ordinary faces. That old person struggling in front of you at the store might have saved lives. That homeless veteran on the corner might have rescued soldiers under fire. That struggling single mother might be raising the future leader who changes the world. Judgment is easy, cruelty is easy, but compassion requires us to pause and consider that everyone has a story we haven't heard. Margaret Hayes spent 100 years teaching this lesson, and her legacy continues in the 147 lives she saved, the thousands of lives those people have touched, the endless ripples of love spreading out from one woman's choice to give everything when the world gave her nothing. If this story moved you, if it reminded you to look closer, to judge, less to love more, then hit that like button. Right now, subscribe to this channel so you never miss stories that restore your faith in humanity, and share this video with someone who needs to remember that kindness matters, that every person has value, that the most important work we do in this world often goes unnoticed until it's almost too late. Let's honor Margaret and people like her by choosing compassion over judgment, by seeing people instead of walking past them, by remembering that we're all just trying to survive this beautiful, difficult life, and the least we can do is be kind to each other along the way.